Hi, everyone, and thanks for being with me again. Now, I need to start this by saying I know that a lot of people aren't watching some of these videos because they're about an issue which a lot of people, for whatever reason, uh, aren't all that interested. Yet, what I'm talking about throughout this series is an issue which impacts, we all should be aware of, because it impacts all of us. It may not necessarily be that we ourselves have got these issues around domestic violence, but what it does mean is that there are people in our lives who have experienced or are experiencing, as we speak, issues around gender based violence. So it is important that we all try to find a way, I guess, to engage with this subject. I'm doing my best by having a series of conversations about the way that I have worked with people around family violence for decades. And I'm hoping that some of the information that I provide is helpful. And today I'll be doing the same. This particular conversation is of help to um, I hope some men, but anybody who's confronted with anger as an issue in their lives, and particularly this particular session is directed also at practitioners because I'm going to be talking today about a process that I have used that has helped um, many people confront this particular issue. In particular, confronting the idea um, that they have not engaged with the person who's experiencing their bad behavior in a way which helps them to understand what those experiences actually are. So I'm going to. This is mostly in a storyline, I guess. I'm going to talk about um, how I came to this conclusion. I'm going to talk about a process I used in domestic violence groups and anger programs to help people confront this issue. So this all started many years ago now. So at least, I guess, 15, 20 years ago. It's hard to remember exactly when. But I I developed this program, which incidentally I wrote an article for the Australian Association of Social Workers Journal, and if you want to look for it, it's called the Reverse Role Play, and it's in uh, December 2010 uh, eh, version of the journal or whatever. So please feel free if you want to find it or search for it, just look it up. But so I've written about all of these things that I'm about to talk to you about now. Now, what happened was some years ago, a group of us, which was 6 workers, set up a program called the Confronting Violence and Abuse Group. And the purpose of this program was that it was an open-ended session. It was a new model we developed whereby people could come in, men would come in to this group, and they could come and go as they please. So every week we'd have new members. We'd have some people that would return, of course, but it was open-ended. So it wasn't a structured group as many domestic violence groups are. It was completely available to people. They weren't mandated to come to this group. They're people that, for some reason, usually their partners have told them that they need to do something about this problem. They find out about the group, they attended. Now, on one particular occasion, well, one of the problems that we had was that trying to engage with men knowing that they may not be returning, or to engage with men so that they will return, remained a continual problem for us. And the way we set the group up was that we would be on a rotating basis. There would be 2 workers working with the group, and one person was assigned as an observer. And so after each group, we would do a feedback session as to what we did well, what could be improved, and so on. It was a really great way of learning about how we were practicing around this particular issue. On one particular occasion, though, we had a group of about 6 guys, and we were just struggling to find a way to um, to get through to them, for them to understand how their behaviour was impacting their partner. There was a lot of blame, that they were not taking responsibility, so they were blaming their partners and blaming everybody else for what was happening. And during the break, um, I went I went outside away from them all and started to think, well, how can we do this differently? What can we do? And I came upon the following idea, which I've used for countless number of groups since this time. And so I decided that what we'll do is we'll go back and the guys are in a circle, but we made it a much tighter circle. And in that circle, I'd ask the guys to write on their name tags, underneath their name, the name of their partner. And I stood in the middle. Now, this was an experiment. I had no idea how this was going to work, but I figured we needed to find a way for them to take on the role of their partner, to understand what their behavior was like for her. In fact, what it was like for the partner to live with them. So I thought I needed to find a way to reverse that role, to help them to understand what that was. Um, so in this particular group, I stood in the middle, and I've developed this, changed this over the years. But the way I started it was, what is it like for you to live with? So if his name was John, her name was Karen, I'd say, what is it like for you, Karen, to live with John? Now, I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how all of this process worked. But in this particular group, um, it was raw because it was the first time I'd ever done it. And interestingly enough, the following week, two guys came back, the two most difficult people in this group, the ones who, in fact, this particular process was set up for because they were not engaging in the group at the time. They came back and said, because of the exercise that we did, I was better able to understand what this was like for my partner. And I went home and I talked about her, and I want to come back to learn more. And so from that, I've developed the following. So what I do now is I stand in the group, get the people to change the name tag, his name on top, her name on the bottom. They write it down. And the first question I do ask them every time is, what is it like, Karen, to live with John? Now, it's an interesting exercise because when you tell people this is what you're going to do, they think it's a joke. They can't imagine themselves, interestingly enough, they can't imagine themselves taking on the role of their partner. So they snigger, they look at you as if to say, you're a bit of a wanker. What in the hell are you doing here? I just want to make the point too that I do this usually in the fifth or sixth session of probably an 8 to 12 week group, because by that time I understand who these people are. I've got a sense of their particular issues, and I also can know what questions to ask them. That is so different from the first group I ran with, the Confronting Violence Abuse group, because I'd only heard a little bit about who they were. I hadn't had great in-depth understandings as to the situations that brought them there in the first place. So with the groups after that, though, I spent much more time with them, particularly when we were doing stuff in the anger programs, and so on. So I would get a group of people together. Now, sometimes for these anger programs, I had up to 20 participants, and some of them were women. So I would choose, because it takes a long time. It can take 10 to 15 minutes just to have a conversation with one of these men while doing the reverse role play. So I would get 6 people that I thought were probably the most likely to engage, and they would always be the men. And then I would have the remainder of the participants sitting around the outside. Their job was to take notes, to notice what changes people made, how they became engaged with the process, and what understandings do they think they learned from doing this exercise. But within this group, I would stand in the middle of them. Now, the purpose of this was that they were seated, so I would be taller. I'd be far more imposing on them. And so when they were their partners, so when John was Karen, Karen would have that sense of imposition, the sense of authority, the sense that I was the one with the power. I was talking down to her, even though everything I did, I can assure you, I used respectful language. It was just the dynamics of me being taller, them being smaller, that seemed to be important, and it seemed to work. Because what would happen in the first instance would be when I was selecting the people, I would select the person I thought was the most engaged, and I'd walk around the group, and I'd wind up with a person that I thought was probably going to be the most challenging in the group to finish with, because they had no idea what was going to happen. And most men will think, this is crazy. I don't want to be my partner, whatever. But when you're in a group of people, there are some group norms that need to take place. Number one is you don't want to look like an idiot. And number two, you want to look pretty competent in what you're doing. But when I asked them initially, Karen, what's it like for you living with John? You would often notice that they would snigger. They would think, well, what in the hell is he talking about? Um, and then they would try and they'd give a kind of a light response to that, nothing terribly in depth. It's okay, he's a reasonably nice guy, whatever. And they'd often say something in that conversation that would cause me to ask them, well, are there times when you find John responds to you and does things to you that you don't like? Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And so they'd cite an example where they knew where they behaved badly towards her. And then I'd say to them things like, well, what was that like for you? How did you respond around that? And then so as they spoke and it was impromptu because I had no idea what they were going to say. And then I'd just deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I'd get to a point whereby I was so focused and so intense on the questioning, you could see that most of these guys, and I mean about 80% of them, by the time they'd finished, they were so invested in the behavior that that, that Karen had that it was becoming emotional. So the guy that snickered at the beginning and was thinking, well, this is odd. I don't know whether I can participate in this. By the time I'd finished with them, had a sense, a deeper, deeper sense of what it was like for her. The empathy he never expressed, became evident. And particularly when I started to talk about children they had, and did children participate in this? Did they hear what was happening? Did they see what you did? What was that like for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old to experience that? Um, what would you like him to have done differently, Karen? How would you like your relationship to be from this time on? Were you heard? Were you understood? What got in the way of you not being understood? So you can imagine the range of questions that you could ask are almost limitless. And it would go on for 10 to 15 minutes just with the one guy. And I would not do them in order. I would just randomly choose somebody with a review in my mind as to who I was going to choose next, depending on how they'd participated in the group. And I'd usually get to what I believe is the most awkward one. Now, I need to say that in the many sessions that I've done, there was only once when I turned around to the guy that I thought would be the most difficult one, and I had my back to him for most of the session, and I turned around to address him, and he just wasn't there. It was too much for him. He got up and left. I never saw him again, because that was the only person of the hundreds of people that I've done this with who decided that it was just too much and they could not confront how their partner may have felt about them. The interesting thing is that when you go around the group, you know that each of them are thinking, am I going to be next? What am I going to say? So in the first instance, they had no idea what this was going to look like. But after the first discussion, as intense as it is, they're thinking, well, what's this like for me? So they're already engaging in this process until you get to them. And you often find, even though you've got that snigger in the first person, you don't get it from the others, because by that time they understand how serious this is. So, so there's one other thing I want to say is that I used to do this also with war veterans. I used to run a program called the Lifestyle Program for vets, and it was a live-in week program. And so I got to understand these people pretty well also by the time I did this. And what I did with them, because they all came with their partners, that was the nature of the program, and I'd sit them all in a circle. So there would be 20 people, about 20 people in the group, I guess. And so I'd have the men sitting in a circle, and behind them I would have their partners. And I'd do the same thing with them. Karen, what's it like living with John? And then we'd talk about their experiences and we'd get pretty intense. But behind them would be their partners, which is unlike the anger program. And the most amazing thing is that as the guys started to talk about what it was like for them, or their understandings of what the partners' experiences were like, on most of those occasions, the women would start to cry. And it was not uncommon for us to pass around a box of tissues, because it would be the first time the women had ever heard from their partners what the men understood when pressed, admittedly, but what the men understood about the woman's situation, and how accurate the men would be in defining what it's like for these women. And so you can imagine the types of conversations that would take place as a result of that. Now, I'm telling you this because no one I've ever known, or I don't know of any other professional that's done the reverse role play. And I know that those people that were in my group, no one else did it. Out of the other 5 people in a confronting violence abuse group, no one else did it. It is a particularly challenging piece of work for workers to do. And I'm not going to explain why. That's not that relevant. What is important, though, is to understand that men, when pushed, can understand what the experiences are like for their partners. And I think we need to find ways to better explore what men do understand but fail to reveal. This is vital. This is important. And that men have the ability to empathize with their partners. They just need someone who believes in them and is prepared to work with them. But they can do it. So that's the reverse role play. So let me know what you think about all of that in the comment section below. And do you think, if any of you ever worked in a group where something like the reverse role play, do you think might have been helpful? Let me know in the comment section below. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.